Welcome to Shone's Thoughts. I think I'm going to title this episode Shone's Thoughts, Reporting on the Fire from Within the Fire. And the reason I want to report or to utilize that word is because I was just, reflecting on my experience that I'm going through right now, and all the little bits and pieces, including an audio that I just recently uploaded live. See, I realize I've been getting a lot more open with the things I'm sharing, especially now that I switched over to season 2 of Shone's Thoughts, where it was more about the experiences that I'm experiencing. And obviously one of those experiences would be, being trapped within the monetary system that we're in, and yet I'm working at essentially looking for a way out. That proverbial sitting behind a keyboard and looking for the white rabbit and then following that all the way out. And now, of course, I'm not looking for a white rabbit per se, but I'm definitely seeing that there is a lot of anomalies. And so why I decided to essentially call the episode that, like reporting on the fire from within the fire, is because in this particular experience that I'm in, I'm at a off-grid campsite near a highway and near this beautiful river that we're looking at right now. And I'm looking at a whole bunch of different things, from a lot of trees that had a lot of axe and bark and stuff ripped off of them. Not the axes, they use the axes to chop off the bark and write initials of such. And I've cleaned up this campsite considerably. It has been used as a campsite for a very long time, and over that time there has been at least 100 nails that I picked up, and thousands of pieces of glass, shattered glass that is, and garbage every day, it seems. And there was actually some people that came by today to pick up the garbage that was on the side of the highway. And so I'm having this overall experience on what I'm going through. And the reason why I'm here, of course, is because setting off with this idea to go camping and suddenly finding out that all campsites were, as I said, between $25 to $35 means that almost camping has turned into paying rent as well. So you can't necessarily go out into the world and camp, because there are so many places that organizations, people, city councils, whatever it is, have banned camping. And there's so much land out there, like a large amount of parks and a large amount of roadside areas, especially long highways, that are unclaimed. But yet, I totally get the understanding between those two paradoxes. That land which should be available for camping and to support living and sustain living, and yet at the same time, those people that are utilizing that land have no concern or care for it. I'm sure, yes, there are many people that do. They want to recycle. But yet, for some reason, they go out, and every night that I've been here, I've witnessed people leaving garbage all over the campsites, including the first one that I stayed in, off-grid. I was there the first night, and while I was there by myself. And as I mentioned, the girls were, and the 2 boys were in the campsite where I'm at now. And yet, during the day, an entire family came by and used the other side of the campsite for their family get-together, which was perfectly cool. But when I came back after a long hike, I found that my campfire, everything had been removed from it, and they had essentially ripped up a pie box that I had and dropped the pieces all over their side of the campgrounds. And so, yeah, those two things truly do conflict. And now you can say anything you want as the reason why, but yet we all live in a world that has nature in it. Doesn't matter what country we're from. We are all have the possibility to respect nature and definitely not bring garbage into it. There's actually a sign at the campsites that are just a little bit down the road from me that asks people to please stop littering and leaving their garbage and to respect Mother Nature. And so these are all these experiences that I'm having and the understandings that I'm coming to because I'm here in this specific space with these specific bits of wildlife. And like even the tree that is in the water, that its roots have essentially broken and the tree fell over and into the water, it was completely hacked apart with an axe and has initials carved in it and all the bark stripped and ripped away. And so you can kind of get the understanding of, even though the water of the river was eroding the tree might have been able to support itself if it hadn't kept having to be battled against people hacking it away and driving spikes into it. But like I said, I'm having this experience because I'm in this situation with, having to utilize and be more efficient with the little bit of the monetary system that I have left connected to me. And yet, in a sense, I'm understanding why I'm here while I'm here. See, because obviously there are other places that I would rather be with other people that I'd rather be with, but yet I'm here. And there's something called hindsight, and there's a saying about hindsight being 20/20. And it's the idea that we can look back in our past, and generally it's our long ago past, meaning a week, 2 weeks, 1 year, 2 years, that type of deal. And we're able to better have a respect for why things happen the way that they did oftentimes. If we're able to truly get down to the core of healing that situation, we can even see why those negative events had to have happened. And oftentimes, at least for my own first initial part of the healing journey, I was going back into experiences that I had in the past and better understanding why they happened, and even those ones I didn't prefer, understanding why those particular ones had to have happened in order to get me to where I would then be. And yet, this particular experience, I'm actually looking at the experience while I'm in the experience and recognizing, well, why did I have to get to this place? See, I would have only chosen this campsite, for example, if I did because I didn't have the sources and the resources, in order to go stay in a motel or to stay in an on-grid community area that had access to Wi-Fi and to data and such. Isn't that nice? The bird jumped into frame there. And anyway, so I had to have the situation in order to get me to be here in this moment. And it could be even just for seeing that bird hop around on that rock. I'm so blessed. He's moved out of frame now, but he's still sitting there at the highest point of the tree stump now, blowing in the wind. Now he flew away. Anyways, so I had to have my situation happen to me so that I would eventually be here in this moment of time. And, even when I consider the random showing up of my cousin at a park that I was just down the road when I was even first considering staying here. And yeah, that was a interesting timeline jump, we'll call it, that all of a sudden, my cousin who I haven't seen in a long time ends up just showing up at the park that's on a road that leads to where I'm at, just randomly, and says, "Hey, I just ran into you. That's weird. I was going to blah, blah, blah." See, all things happen to get me to this point. And now being in this point, I'm able to see, okay, well, if there are or is the idea of anchoring light, then it essentially makes sense that these lights are spread out and put in certain areas at certain times in order to anchor that light. And so therefore, perhaps being out in nature, perhaps I'm anchoring the light that's out here. Or more importantly, maybe it's anchoring me. And actually it is anchoring me if you think about it. See, right now nature is supporting me in the physical. Means nature is giving me the wind to stay cool, the water to essentially give me nourishment because I'm using it for the oatmeal, as well as cleanliness because I'm using it for the bathing, as well as drinking because I'm using it for drinking, hydrating. The water is a very fast-moving river, and in my opinion, fast-moving water is from a whitewater rapid river is a very healthy amount of water or style of water to be drinking, especially if you get it when it's actually in the moving area. And this particular river, as you see, has a lot of whitewater rapids. Actually, so much so that they actually have a school of whitewater rafting around here that I truly do want to try. And I'd love to bring a rather large group of people here and support that business. Like, yeah, just so that they're doing it as much as they want to. And I'd like to try it myself. Actually, more than try, I'd love to master it. Like, this is an activity that I would love to have the gear and the friends and family to actually whitewater raft all the time. That would be awesome, to battle the waves, not battle, but learn how to flow with the whitewater rapids. I think that would be a great experience to experience. And anyways, so coming back to what I was saying about grounding, but going from grounding to talking about supporting, and the nature is supporting me right now. It's giving me areas that I can pitch a tent and that I'm not required to participate in that portion of the monetary system, which, by the way, I do believe that we are going to start slowly moving out of. And that's perhaps the reason why I created those audios where I talk about blueprints, about, you know, a new voting system where we truly do vote. And I talk about a new way of learning in like group settings and having teachers learn while the students teach. Meaning that if one has mastered one class, perhaps, or one subject, perhaps that's what they teach while they're learning something else in exploratoriums. And healing centers, taking over those buildings and turning them into centers of healings. Like, just imagine, for instance, if there's a transitional time where we perhaps have a lot of empty buildings, like a mall, for example. We don't need to have a whole bunch of stores selling all this different merchandising when people can sell their own stuff locally and do that at smaller community areas, such as the idea of the living marketplace, a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week farmer's market, where people trade and buy goods that they need, and they do it in a much more organized fashion. So we could even utilize malls for other types of situations, for living, for example. Maybe for a while, rather than tearing down these malls, we could turn them into spaces for people to live in communities. Like, redefine how we live, rather than living in modular units or living on top of each other, essentially in these 8 or higher buildings. Like, I would love to live at a higher floor of a skyscraper, but I wouldn't love to live, in a house that you walk out and there's a busy street in front of you, or there's a train, a subway, jiggling the building as it moves past. However, maybe I'd love to actually live in an old Aldo store. Convert some of these areas into homes and communities. Because a lot of those stores are the size of apartments nowadays, or even bigger than some of the apartments. So imagine converting a whole bunch of different stores into living structures where communities can learn to essentially work together. Yeah, wouldn't that be awesome? Like you turn a mall into an exploratorium, and then you turn part of that mall into living quarters. Like you turn the big areas where places like Walmart or Zellers or the Bay or stuff, that those anchor stores, that they could be turned into a living quarters for travelers that were moving through and they wanted to, spend some time in one school, one exploratorium, and then they wanted to move on to the next, but they wanted to stay there and learn with passion and power into what they were doing. Like I just had that amazing idea. And anyways, so coming back to the support, Earth is supporting me, and perhaps what's actually happening. See, if we are all energy, and I mean us, but I also mean everything around us, all conscious being and, all consciousness overall. If we are all, energy, power, ethereum, essence, materium, whatever it is, energy. So I'm just going to call it energy for now. But if we are all that, and there is an effect of essentially balancing energy, I would imagine that when one comes out into a place like this, that their energy field, the 6 feet perhaps that surround them, would therefore be grounding a lot more of the natural beauty that is here, that is in this nature that I'm sitting in right now. And therefore, in a sense, the earth is investing in my energy. Not mine specifically, more importantly, anyone really that does participate in that type of situation. And yet, in order to get here, I literally had to go through all of the steps, including being deprived of or the inability to essentially bring in my own income, because I have seriously tried over the last 3 years many different avenues to bring in income, but not only just the 3 years. As I was mentioning in my podcast the other day, I was also writing movie scripts. I produced 2 plays. I created several companies. I even created a very successful tailoring company that, ended up not being mine anymore or not owning it anymore, and I haven't for over 3 years. And yet I had to get to all of those path points, all of those choice points, those essentially things that I went through in order to get to this moment right now that I could be here to witness. I would almost just say it's an atrocity of how this camp has been treated and the remnants of how it's been left over and the constant garbage. But yet I appreciate that this area has supported me as it has. And even you could say that, as I was mentioning in my Men and Mice podcast and afterthoughts, that sometimes the reason why something happened is all this had to happen in order for me to come here and then have these thoughts that led me to the thought that perhaps I'm more than just grounding. That also does lead into the next part of this, the grounding part, but that the nature is supporting me to balance my energy to help me reach my goals of, manifestation and forward movement towards restoration and the revealing of our beautiful planet. And, the idea that perhaps I just simply need to tell more as opposed to worrying about what or how any platform is going to view me, or even any people for that fact. I realized the other day, and I just realized only a couple days ago, about how people must perceive me that know me in my life. How they must perceive what I'm actually doing. Because see, one of the things I was always told is, don't let people steal your dreams. So you're not going to necessarily tell them so much of all the inner thoughts, the inner plans and reasons and, the whole thought process. I do have Shone's thoughts where I do share the thoughts, but I'm called to share those thoughts, and yet at other times I'm not called to share some other thoughts. And yeah, anyways, we're getting all confused with that and such, but nonetheless, I'm realizing like being here is the reason that I'm here. See, I feel really good being in this exact space, even though there are mice. And actually, amazingly enough, in the trunk of my car, I had left a whole bunch of packages of oatmeal, and a mouse, or what I perceive as a mouse, had eaten into 2 of them, and they were on top of a crate. Hard to get to, perhaps, from their point, but they were on a stack of crates that were in my trunk of my car, and 2 of the packages had been eaten to by a mouse. And I emptied the entire trunk to find that there were no mice, which was pretty interesting. And there was no real holes that I could say that the mouse got out of. So I don't know. Maybe it's in the top of the hood, not the trunk lid. Yeah, maybe they're in the trunk. It's in the trunk lid. But anyways, back to the other thing about being here to ground. I was also just thinking that perhaps the energies that, since many people all over the planet, that we are grounding the energies in wherever we live. And maybe this energy area of the world simply needed some more grounding energy. And so that's perhaps why I was here. But that's kind of why I go all the way back from reporting within the fire, because right now I'm in the event. I'm in the situation wondering, well, how's anything further going to play out? Not seeing beyond my radar screen. And I guess that would be normally okay, but my radar screen has gotten very small. And you could almost say that it's because a lot of my attention is focused just on this river. And I'm getting a lot of rest. I'm, a lot of peace of mind, and the thoughts are high vibrational. That's something that I was just watching on a podcast talking about, if we need to perhaps control our thoughts, refrain from having negative thoughts. Because those negative thoughts are the thoughts that are essentially disrupting our ability to calm ourselves. And that ability to calm ourselves is the ability to release and let go those traumas that we hold on to. And with more, perhaps, tranquility in our lives, maybe it's easier to let go of those thoughts. But back to what I was saying before, is I never really thought until recently of how people perceive me, and perhaps how they've perceived me this whole time. And I've also never realized how people continually want to talk about other people in their lives. It wasn't until recently when I started hearing, after only a couple days, sometimes the same story, that I realized that, people like telling the stories, and sometimes they even forget the story that they already told. And then I look back and see that's not a criticism it's just an observation, because it was from a few different people that I had actually heard. And then I realized, well, how many people are telling the latest stories about me? Because in a sense, I do, and I have lived a rather peculiar life in the last 3 years, especially. Bullet training across Canada, staying in one town after the other town, or wherever I was staying. And then essentially looking for work, yet not succeeding, but being given the opportunities, provided the graces from God to be able to move forward, to find a way forward. And yet people from the outside not understanding, and often talking and gossiping about things. And a lot of times it's not necessarily just gossiping, but it's talking about and then having an opinion about it. Like labeling, giving people, it's not just the word crazy, it could be other words as well. And then that energy projecting upon me perhaps, and therefore limiting. I don't know. See, I recognize the people in my life that I have shared a lot of the information that I'm slowly sharing here, coming from a lot of different sources, but perhaps all of the same source. See, I'm a storyteller by nature. I love to tell stories and to make up stories, to invent narratives that capture emotion and perhaps share feeling. Like there was this one scene that I was working on my steel dragon, and it was a scene where the main character, the woman, she was assaulted, and she's a Chinese migrant or immigrant prostitute, doing prostitution because her family's father had passed away, and she was essentially traded into, or in order to pay her debt, she was into the prostitution ring for the Chinese miners that were over here in Canada prior to the 1900s. And interestingly enough, she reunites with her childhood friend from her country back home. And it's a guy named Sai. And she knows where he's at, and she denies how she feels because she feels shame for herself. And so she ends up being attacked one night, and then finding her way, and in the pouring rain, walking through all of the camp tents that are for the Chinese people, which the Chinese people working here supposedly had to work in these off-grid camp tents, versus the other miners, whether they were European of whatever color, they got to live in more of a cabin, log cabin type of situation. So anyways, so she's in the pouring rain just after being assaulted. Even though she is a prostitute, she comes looking for him, to find comfort in him. And I remember writing this so many times, the whole series of events, like trying to get each image captured. Because see, when you're writing a movie script, it's not just writing a story, it's setting up what you wish to see, then what you wish to feel by what is said, and writing all that down, and then being able to envision it yourself. And I remember spending hours upon hours invested in this particular scene, trying to capture the emotion of that whole story. So, as I said, I'm a storyteller by nature, and I love telling stories. And yet, the story that perhaps is the story of reality is super amazing. See, because as I mentioned in my podcast the other night, I'm searching for the truth. Means I'm not necessarily buying into one narrative over another about what they think. And believe me, a lot of different people think they know the truth. There's a lot of different varying perspectives about what the truth of our reality is. And through this experience that God has allowed me, I've been essentially sifting through all these varying narratives, whether it's the narratives of Kim and the GIA, or the narratives of Carrie Kay and her group called the Plasma Tribe, or Alobar and the Earth Guard, or Kevin Trudeau and the Global Information Network, or Greg Braden, Joe Dispenza, Caroline Miss, all that were part of Gaia. Or even other people's narratives, such as Charlie Ward from the Charlie Ward Show, or the Judy Byington Report. So many different sources to learn from, even, mainstream and politics informations. And then you've got the Ancient Aliens with Giorgio, and I can't remember the other guy's name that's often on there, but that whole thing. And then you even have the narratives from people like Billy Carson. So many different variations. The variations of our reality from the channel texts of Paul Selig. And I've taken all of this information and I've been essentially assembling it into perhaps what is the nature of our reality. And yet, where I'm at is in the middle of nature, away from all of that, but yet I'm still sharing that information with you. And perhaps, as I said, being in this area grounded by this nature, I'm able to assemble all of that together, because it's possible, just possible perhaps, that the truth wasn't all from one source. Means it's from source, but I mean the areas that we derive the truth. Perhaps in order to get the truth in here, it had to come from multiple different sources, and then it had to be compiled by a storyteller, maybe. I don't know. I think there's credibility in a lot of different parts of what I've come to understand. And of course, any of those people that I've just mentioned, I'd highly recommend them still going into what they are doing themselves. Because, there's valuable information to be learned through discernment and all of that stuff. And there's a lot of it that I continue to utilize. Like, for instance, the Samadhi videos. There's 4 of them now. The first 3 I've utilized very, very much in my own understanding of why things are the way they are. And sometimes, in order for me to have the experience of cleaning up this campsite, well, the first time, I had to have those people come in and mess it up. And then that got me in the action of cleaning. And then now we look more forward, and I cleaned up this campsite the first time that I came here of all the litter. And then the second time that I came here, not only did I clean the litter, I also ended up burning a lot of it, burning the paper parts of it. And then I also ended up sweeping a lot of the glass and nails up that were all over this campsite. Learning I guess, about the idea of taking care of nature, and then leading my thoughts all the way to creating this video now. That's a lot more in sync with, what I'm learning rather than what I learned. And that was the huge difference, I guess, with season 2 of Shone's Thoughts. It was time to share all the things that I'm learning. And yet, I honestly feel it's also equally important to be able to go back a long time ago. And perhaps I've done a lot of that with my TFT tapping. Like, I really do believe many people could benefit from the TFT tapping. And I'm uncertain, like, I started after I got certified for that thing, for the TFT, wanting to share it with people, but yet it seemed that people weren't really that interested. But I honestly do believe that learning to do the TFT tapping, and if you're not wanting to, learn how to do it for yourself yet, perhaps I really do need to set up a system and maybe even talk about it every time I do a podcast where people could utilize it on a virtual with me. We could get together on Zoom, and I could essentially meet you, learn about you, and then prepare in real time which algorithm, which tapping sequence we would use. And then together we would do that on Zoom. And yeah, it takes about an hour. And I guess, like, charging something, I don't really know how much things are worth or stuff like that, but like the number 88 comes into my mind. So maybe what I'll do is on Patreon, I'll create an offering in which people can sign up for an hour of TFT with me. Yeah, maybe I'll do that. I don't know. Like I said, I'm always thinking of figuring out ways of how I can essentially continue living like this, as well as grow. And that means grow in whatever economy we find ourselves in. I would prefer other methods, but honestly, at the same time, maybe that's how more people learn about TFT, is by doing that, and then perhaps then learning and gaining the confidence to go and do it and learn about it yourself. Maybe that's the step. And maybe that's the whole reason, is in order to get from all those spaces back, way back when I first learned TFT, all the way back to now, I had to go through this experience. And empowered by nature, as well as grounded with nature, or grounding nature. So anyways, I want to thank you so much for sharing your time and attention with me, and I'll be uploading this tomorrow, I guess. Positive thoughts for the last 35 minutes. I love it. Thank you so much to that video who, I can't look on the video right now, but it's a man who was teaching how to do telekinesis. So I will essentially, right here, if I remember, I'll link one of his videos, or I'll link the video where he talked about positive thoughts. I think that was a great little segue into this talk for me. All right, you have a wonderful day, and I will talk to you soon.